Israel is under attack by rockets from Lebanon, allegedly. And now the question is, why is Lebanon sending rockets to Israel? And this actually is a very deep-seated, controversial, although it's not controversial because I'll paint the objective situation for everyone, but it's a very controversial and deep-seated, very heated topic when it comes to Israel versus all these other nations. Now, just to provide the background context, we have Israel, and Israel after World War II, America and England, they took the population who were damaged from from Germany's World War II, and they put them in Israel and claimed that it was their state. And these folks, these Jewish folks, they were ideologically Jewish, right? You can be ethnically and ideologically Jewish. You can also be ethnically Muslim or ideologically Islamic. And so there's religion, there's ethnic background, there's all that. But these people, these Jewish people, they were put into Israel. And based off their ideology, based off their religion, the religion says that, well, in their religion, this is where they're from. This is their sacred land. This is their promised land. To the Muslims as well, this is also their promised land. This is also their sacred land. So once America and England put people in this state of Israel, and now that's a new state, that's a new government, there were people there who were displaced partially. Now, if we're going back in time to all the Abrahamic religions, we have Judaism and we have Islam, and then Christianity came out of Judaism. They were all in the same region. Okay, so in the Middle East, this is all the same area where all of these major religions bred out of. And these people largely, ancestrally, are the same people. They're the same people. The difference here is ideology. And so when you had these people who came there and they displaced the people who were already living there, but they both claim that this is their land, to be honest, objectively speaking, if you go back in time, this is both of their lands because this is where all of those religions were bred out of. So naturally, you're going to have Israel, who's backed by America, and you're going to have Palestine, where Israel has more dominion over Palestine right now. So Palestinians are displaced a little bit more due to the nature of conquering. But both parties are violent towards each other. I mean, we're seeing catastrophic events on both sides, right? And so you have these people, the Palestinians, who are supported by other Muslim countries. So you have Muslim countries supporting Palestine, America supporting Israel. We can see how this is going to be a long time battle in the Middle East where no peace is going to be brokered out. The only way to really get peace is when, if you're in the minority, you're the one who's being conquered and you have less power in that relationship, you submit to the authority and the power of the conqueror. This is a very difficult balance because if you want peace, that's how you achieve it. Unfortunately, both sides don't want to submit, right? Naturally so, because they both claim it's their sacred land. Israel has most of that area right now. They've been able to gain dominion over the past few decades, thanks to the backing of America, and America funds a lot of Israel's technology and military might. At the same token, Palestinians have the support of Saudi Arabia, Iran, other Muslim countries, Lebanon, right? And so we're seeing this back and forth of violence. Now, this is happening, and I'm pointing this specific instance out, but there's a lot of areas in the world, like in Africa, there's a lot of countries in Africa where there's wars going on. There are genocides that are occurring. There's a lot of violence that will not find peace anytime soon. I will say the most likely area to find peace, even though it's a far stretch, is in the Middle East, because they are ethnically the same people. You just have a difference in ideology. So ideology, see, we are tribalistic animals as humans, and so at the offset, on the surface, we look at each other's skin color, right? This is where racism comes from. But you have one tribe versus another tribe, and these tribes, they're warring with each other because they're the odd one out. They're different, and that is a threat to their tribe. You're always going to have competition where one tribe is competing with the other tribe. Then beyond this, you escalate a step above that. You have ideology. And this ideology doesn't have to be religion, although in this case it is religion, but it's just any kind of ideology. So you have one faction of ideology against another faction of ideology. They're going to compete with each other because we're humans, right? So even if we think that the ideology is beyond us as humans, it's something higher than us humans, we are still human. So in our human form, we're using the ideology as a way to compete as well, or we're going to use certain methods to make sure that one ideology wins out. We can go back to the Crusades, where we had the Christians and the Muslims back in the medieval times, and they were warring against each other. They were also conquering other lands and spreading, a lot of times forcefully, to adopt their ideology, their religion. This is nothing new, right? I'm just giving a few examples here, but this has been occurring time and time again in human history. And so when we see the situation in the Middle East, of course, we would want both parties to have peace and come to an agreement. At the same time, we also have to acknowledge that conquer is part of humanistic tendencies. And so this is not a justification, and I'm not on either side here. I'm simply, in this instance, painting the objective situation, the objective metrics, because a lot of people don't know the history. A lot of people don't have context. A lot of people don't even know what's going on or why these people are mad at each other. A lot of people don't understand how there's not just an ethnic background dispute, but it's more of an ideological dispute. And this ideology stems from the geographical region of which they're disputing. And thus you have people who are violent to each other in such realms that it's not just individual rights that are getting obliterated. I mean, I was going to say collateral damage in terms of like your life, but that's also an individual right, right? Life, liberty, and property. And so if you're being oppressed, like your liberty is being oppressed, you're being harassed, being forced out through difficult means to be removed from the area, your life is at risk, your property is taken away from you, that's not good on all counts. At the same time, we have to acknowledge, it's not that I particularly want to badmouth conquest, because conquest is just who we are as humans. Like humans have good and bad traits. And even just saying good and bad traits, that's all subjective, because in one instance, conquest can be good, and in another instance, conquest can be bad. Like if I believe there's a certain percentage, like maybe 5% of all people from the East Asian area have Genghis Khan or Mongol DNA in them because of what Genghis Khan did hundreds of years ago in conquering territory. So in that instance of when Genghis Khan was in that territory, it was bad because people lost their lives. You go forward multiple generations to where a whole lot of people right now exist thanks to Genghis Khan. It's a positive thing because they exist, right? It's subjective and it's relative in those terms. And so it's a very difficult thing for me to say, or for anyone to say, this is good, this is bad. We can look in the micro and say something is good or bad, but when we look at a timeline of human history and empires, we are not seeing these empires come and go, oh, Ottoman Empire, Germanic Empire, whatever, unless we know the micro history and the certain battles and wars and the micro events that happen. We are not actively thinking this is good that this Ottoman Empire is gone and this new empire came in, or this is bad that this empire took over and this other empire was kicked out. We're not thinking in those terms because the time period is so far stretched away from us. It's not something we're fathoming in our minds. But when we see it in our lives right now, what's happening, of course, I would say individual rights is the standard. If individual rights are getting infringed on, it's bad. At the same time, this is part of conquest. Again, I'm not justifying conquest. I'm stating how this is occurring. And all countries are involved in this from the top down. So America's at fault in a lot of ways, more so than other nations, because they start the most proxy wars. They start the most rebellion wars all over the world, not just in Europe or what's happening right now, but all over the world. We can say that the American interests have been compromised to an extent because you have power structures that have risen to the top of the hierarchy in America, and they're using the American forum as a way to conquest in other nations. Even if we go back to Dick Cheney and George Bush, where weapons of mass destruction, okay, we're going to invade these countries, and then we go into these countries, but really we have contracts with these American oil companies, and they're able to go in, and they're able to create infrastructure and create revenue for their companies and profit, and then actually give it back to the politicians who wanted to go into these countries for WMDs. That is compromising America for a certain interest that doesn't serve America long term. So that's the wrong kind of conquest if we're evaluating that micro event. But this is an example of you're going to have bloody wars, you're going to have a lot of violence, and you want to have that peace. And like, for example, if you go to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, there can be peace made, but there are Western powers that came to Zelensky probably over a year now ago, and they said, don't compromise on peace because this is how we spend our bills, this is how we funnel money around. And if you make peace with Russia, well, we're not going to be able to fund this war. And there are a ton of interests that are relying on this capital from the taxpayers being funneled into this war. And so you need to keep this machine going. Also, at the same time, if you have Zelensky compromise with Russia, Russia is the bigger power in this situation, even though we know Zelensky is being backed by American and Western powers, which has more power, arguably, than Russia. But just in that geographical zone, Russia has more power. If you compromise with Russia, you're going to have to let Russia take something away from you because they have more power in that situation if you want the peace, right? So there are difficult compromises to be made. And that's not to say, the next 100 years, Ukraine could form a power structure, gain more territorial land, more military might, and then they come and they conquer Russia, and then Russia has to submit to Ukraine, right? This can go either way. This can go left or right. And so this is bigger than the micro events. That's what I'm trying to portray. I'm trying to scoot us back and look at the macro events and say, okay, well, this is how nations operate, and nations are made out of humans and people, and this is how people operate, even just within a relationship. We even would just in a group, or one person to the next person. And so imagine if we scale it into companies too, but conquest of nations, you're going to get these certain dynamics of the relationships between two nations, two empires, or multiple empires in this mixed bag, and they're going to interact in ways which in the micro events we 100% disagree with, but we understand why it's happening, right? So this is more for clarification of perspective. We understand why things are happening the way they are. We can explain them. We understand them. We understand each side. We're empathetic, not sympathetic, empathetic of each side, each perspective. Doesn't mean we agree. We just know why it's happening and what's going on. And then everyone is going to have their own interests, right? So if you're America, you're going to have your own interests. If you're Russia, you're going to have your own interests. If you're Ukraine, you're going to have your own interests. Even the people in Ukraine, even though they're backed by America, they will still have a slightly different interest than America, right? Zelensky is going to have his own interests of, I want money, power, status, wealth in this nation. If America is going to back me and I get to be put in this position in the hierarchy, that makes me a hero in this situation. Of course, I want to be in this position. He has his own interests. So this is what politics is. When you look at all these different nations, look at all these different leaders, look at all the people behind the leaders, they all have different interests. They're all pursuing something that is self-interested. And then when you're able to take these different points of self-interest and connect them, and you're able to thread that needle, that's how you win the game. Unfortunately, this is a lot more complex than that, which is why we have bloodshed. This is why that throughout history there have been people who have cooperated to not cooperate with other groups of people, right? It's kind of a contradiction in a way, but we are really good at cooperating with each other to not cooperate with other people. And that's all for resources, conquest, territory. And then the same people you cooperated with could betray each other and then go at it against each other, even though you had previously cooperated with each other in the past. So this is a messy game of just humans. Humans are political in themselves. And so understanding this conflict and why it's happening, of course, we don't want innocent people, innocent lives, innocent civilians to be attacked, right? This is really about governments attacking each other. And then, of course, you'll have some people who are the pawns, who are radicalized, and they're doing the bidding of the government. But generally speaking, if you have people in these areas, whether they're in Israel or Palestine or any of these nations, and they're being hit by arms, it doesn't matter if it's lawfully or unlawfully, like unethically, they're being hit by arms, and their lives are ruined. They're just trying to live their life, do their thing. This is something that those are the people who we mainly want to protect, and then we go after the hierarchies, because these people are just in the crossfire. They maybe don't have the means to leave or move. They can't really seek out refuge in another country for whatever reason. They can't get a visa in another country. It's very hard for them to even survive in that nation. They barely have a job, or they can barely run their business, or they have to run their business 7 days a week, 14 hours a day, and they have a bunch of kids they got to take care of. And we can criticize them all day. Why do you have a bunch of kids if you can barely survive? Well, it's also their biological purpose to reproduce, and so it's ingrained in people to reproduce, right? So we have to be empathetic and understand why people are in the certain situations that they're in, but do our best to educate, inform, strategize. Make sure you can't make everyone happy, but you can try to formulate certain strategies and structures that would benefit the majority of people and ensure that there's less chaos, more order, more civility. And to an extent, and we're seeing this now in 2023, you do have to stop the idea of conquest. And we've done a very good job at stopping conquest since the invention of the atom bomb, because if you try to conquer at such a high level, you have the atom bomb coming there waiting for you. And so now we're seeing a lot less conquest. We still see conquest, it's more covert, but a lot less conquest, and it's more about fracturing political and fiscal systems, also cultural systems, than it is overt geographical systems, because there are dire consequences to that. Not that it can't happen, but we're seeing that fracturing off. So we may be in a position where a lot of things are more covert. It's more politically correct to go after a nation covertly than to overtly physically attack them. And that may be a softer approach to where less lives are ruined. So even though I've said all this, we're actually in one of the most peaceful periods of time in human history, thanks to the atom bomb. And so that may be the trajectory of where humans go, because we've come to this point of the timeline where we don't use crazy arms to demolish geographical regions, because those arms are so powerful, it would lead to mutually assured destruction. And so we do things in a more soft-spoken manner. I'm using that term in a metaphorical basis, but that soft-spoken manner actually preserves more lives than it takes away. And of course, conquest will still happen, but at least you have more innocent lives being saved than being taken out in harm's way.